Croeso to Wrexham News. I'm Carrie Harper.
And I'm Councillor Marc Jones.
And today we're talking to Seamus Logan, who is an MP for the SNP. And we're going to be talking about the idea of a Celtic alliance and closer working between Plaid Cymru and the SNP with the intention of giving people a more positive alternative, basically. But Seamus, you've been at the coalface in London since 2024. What's it been like?
First of all, thank you for the invitation to speak with you this morning. Absolutely delighted to renew my connections with Wales, with Plaid Cymru, and with yourself, Carrie. Yes, I've been here now, 19 months. Apologies about the state of the flat. This is my third of a mix where I live, but yeah, it's been very interesting. I'm enjoying it. I didn't think I would enjoy it as much, but it's a great privilege and a great honour to represent all of the people in Aberdeenshire North and Moray East. And I do mean all of the people, because my job isn't just to represent those who voted for me, it's to represent everybody. And sometimes picking up for groups that you wouldn't naturally regard as your political allies. But that's the nature of politics. And it's really good to make friends and make alliances, even across party divides, even across the chamber. I could consider myself to be good friends with a range of people in all parties. So it's been tremendous. Hard to say what impact you actually have as one person in a room full of 630 odd. But you do your best, you speak up, and you hope that people are listening. And considering the number of U-turns that the Labour government have engaged in the last 18, they've been forced to listen in the end. Should have listened at the start, but we'll come back to that later, I'm sure.
That's one point I was going to raise, that a lot of people were quite hopeful in 2024, thinking about getting rid of the Tories, the prospect of a Labour government, which I'm sure people hoped would be more progressive than it's turned out to be. One thing we found on the doorstep in Wrexham particularly is things like cuts to the winter fuel allowance made people very angry. I don't know what your take on it is in terms of, do Labour realise how much anger there is out there in terms of some of their policy decisions in this term?
You're absolutely right, Carrie. We had a lot of correspondence. I get something like 600 or 700 emails a month into my inbox. Not all of them turn out to be cases that we have to pick up, but quite a substantial number of them. And a lot of them were about the winter fuel payment. If I'm looking at it objectively, and we are speaking informally this morning, I just think Sir Keir Starmer is very badly advised.
Yeah,
I'm not going to
feels like it, doesn't it?
But I just think he gets terrible advice. Whether that comes from the Treasury, whether it's from his SPAD, whether it's from his cabinet colleagues, it's hard to say where it comes from. But what really, it seems paradoxical, but he really should listen to the opposition sometimes. He would be better advised.
It does strike you, doesn't it, that the worst of all possible worlds is to make a bad decision, and then after letting that settle in, you turn on it as well. You not only look, as you say, badly advised or have no moral compass, but you also appear very weak, I think. And that's what's really hold Labour, I think, both Scotland and in Wales.
100%, absolutely. And you can see that in the polls. They're doing real badly. And no sign of any change. I'm not sure if folks picked this up in Wales, but over Christmas, it became clear that a number of Scottish Labour MPs, or should I say Labour MPs in Scotland, were actively plotting against Starmer. And their colleagues, particularly Harper, called them out on it and branded them as idiotic.
Wow.
Others called them idiots. They were basically plotting to get rid of Starmer and hope that somehow that would their prospects, but I don't see much more of it, to be honest with you.
I think we've got a similar situation in Wales. I think the penny's finally dropped now that they are going to lose control over Wales in the same way as they lost control over Scotland. And what I'd be interested to know how Labour in Scotland have dealt with that kind of loss of power, that sense that they were always going to rule places like Wales and Scotland.
Well, the thing is, I can't really, not a seasoned politician. I only came to politics very late in life, so I can really comment on what's in front of me, Ben. And what I see in front of me is Labour MPs from Scottish constituencies using a very small amount of time that they get in the chamber to ask planted questions, not about politics in Westminster, bills or policies that are being developed in Westminster, but about Holyrood issues. And Welsh questions as well, the exact same thing. And I often feel that they're basically wasting time and that they're not polling well in Scotland either.
I think, as well as the disappointments over things like winter fuel, cuts to disability benefits, we've also seen Labour lurch quite drastically to the right as well, especially on issues like immigration. And, obviously, Plaid are ahead in the polls when we're looking at the next Senedd election. SNP are ahead for the next Holyrood election as well. But looking maybe post-2029, Reform are looking on track in terms of potentially being the next UK government. I think, which makes the alliance between our two parties even more essential, I think. What is your view on Reform? What impact are they having in Scotland? And potentially, what impact do you think that they may have as a UK government under Nigel Farage?
Well, Carrie, I want to differentiate this a little bit into two different elements. One, Reform as we know them in terms of their elected MPs and some of their councillors, and then separate to that, those who either have voted for Reform or are considering voting for Reform. Okay, so let's separate out the politicians from the people, as it were. I don't think that Reform, the politicians, have got the same traction in Scotland that they do in England. I'm not sure about the Welsh situation. They do have some support in my constituency. My constituency is Aberdeenshire. It includes a Holyrood constituency called Banff and Buchan. And I think Reform regard that as potentially their number one target at the Holyrood election. And so they are not to be dismissed as a political force, but they haven't got a leader in Scotland yet. They only recently confirmed their candidate from our area, and their candidate for our area was someone who was so extreme in his views that the Conservative Party booted him out of the party and couldn't have him in the party because of his views. So I think that tells you something about the ilk of the candidate and the status of the party in Scotland. Excuse me. So they're regularly speaking about the need to protect women and children from asylum seekers, immigrants generally. But I would love to engage them in a debate about that, because the statistics simply don't bear out this kind of dog whistle kind of politics. Because the greatest threat to our women and children, and we do need to protect our women and children, but the greatest threat comes from within our own family circles and our friends, not from immigrants. And while there may be one or two high-profile cases where an asylum seeker has attacked or harmed someone in some way, that's very much, as far as I'm concerned, the exception. And most of these people just simply want to come here because they are vulnerable where they currently live, and they want to contribute to our society. So I believe they should be allowed to work, for example. And currently we don't let that happen. In relation to people who might be attracted to Reform, I think they should think very carefully about that. Because the parallels in the wider context in terms of the shift to the right, politicians being dragged to the right. You mentioned the Labour Party, for example. there are some, not entire parallels, but there are some parallels with 1930s Germany, I have to say. I'm not saying there's parallels with the Nazis. I'm just saying the wider political environment is similar to what was going on in 1930s Germany. And so I would urge people to be very cautious about who they're going to elect as their representatives. Now, we know from, even in relation to some councils that have reform majorities, things are descending into chaos in those areas. So I know that not everyone who votes for reform is a racist. I accept that. I know that I know that many people who consider voting for reform have got legitimate grievances and causes for concern. Of course they do. But that is not a reason to elect some of these extreme politicians or wannabe politicians who really, behind the scenes, have got some very, very dodgy opinions and perspectives and policies. So it just, to those people who are considering voting reform, I say very cautious.
I think as well, you know, we're seeing across the pond, aren't we, what opening the door to fascism can look like in terms of what's happening with Donald Trump and the controversies we're seeing with ICE, which is basically his own personal police force, what he's doing with Venezuela, what he's threatening to do with Greenland. You know, it's the same playbook, it's the same trajectory, isn't it? So, you know, really appreciate the point you're making there about the 1930s. And then even closer to home, thinking in a Welsh context, we've seen, former Reform MPs, but whilst they were Reform MPs, Rupert Lowe I'm thinking of, openly talking about abolishing the Senedd. They have one Senedd member, Laura Ann Jones, again, openly talking about abolishing the Senedd. Yeah. So, I mean, they're quite happy locally and to talk about, you know, getting rid of Welsh devolution and Welsh democracy. So that's something else that I worry is going to be on the table that people aren't necessarily thinking about at the moment. And that's why it's so important that we're able to offer people an alternative, isn't it?
Yeah. So I was at a conference in Ireland at the weekend, part of the Peace and Reconciliation project, which is still going on. I mean, all these years later, 28 years later. And it's important that that dialogue is maintained. But I was specifically asked, would it not be very helpful for the Scottish Independence Project if we had a reform government in London? And paradoxically and perversely, that is true, but that is not something I wish. You may find this strange for me to say, but I really do hope that the Labour government succeed in London. And it's for that reason, because if they don't, and they're making a very good fist of no, if they don't, there is a very strong possibility that reform could get a significant number of seats. I'm not going to go as far as to say that they will form the next government. I think polls are one thing and elections are another. But there's every prospect that they will get a significant number of seats. They could form the opposition in the government. Even that would be bad news. But no, I would want to see our independence projects succeed on their own merits, not because they're somehow better than the alternative in London.
Is it very difficult for you in Scotland? You've been effectively governing in Scotland for the past almost 20 years now. Is it difficult for you to project yourselves as that party of change, that party that's going to deliver when you've had to make difficult decisions over those past 2 decades?
Yeah, I think it's easy for our opponent to tackle us on all the mistakes that we've made and to blame everything on the party and the government, when in fact we've had to deal with the Brexit vote in 2016, the impact of the COVID pandemic, the other global shocks, for example, the war in Ukraine. These things have all, and it's easy for our opponents to tackle us in those, but our strength and the reason why our support is holding well in the polls, and it is showing that we will do well next May. At the minute, take nothing for granted. The reason I believe is that people who support the SNP believe firmly in our raison d'etre, which is independence for Scotland, and not likely to be blown off course by health service problems in the education system, other problems like the ferries, for example, all the things our opponents throw at us. They're not likely to walk away from it on the back of those things because they believe in our overall project. By the same token, though, we do need to demonstrate competence in those areas. And I believe John Swinney, he's restored a lot of confidence in the party. He's brought it together. He's actually making very good progress on things like waiting service. So, yeah, we're plugging away.
The next point I was going to raise, and it's maybe more one for me and Marc than you, Seamus, but it was about parity in terms of powers, because Wales has consistently got a pretty raw deal, basically. I was just going to use a couple of examples just to demonstrate how far behind we are when you look at Scotland and even Northern Ireland and even some of the regions in England as well. So we've seen quite recently Westminster refused to devolve management of the Crown Estate in Wales. That was devolved to Scotland in 2017. I think has brought in, just in 1 year, £100 million extra for the Scottish Government, but was blocked by Labour, the Tories and Reform, devolution of that to Wales. We've also had issues around devolving policing and justice. They've refused to devolve policing and justice as well. We just seem to be stonewalled on issues like fair funding on rail. So HS2, we've calculated we're due a consequential of approximately 4 billion for HS2, which Scotland is getting a consequential because it's not classed as a England and Scotland project, but they're classing it as an England and Wales project. But we seem to be getting a really poor deal in terms of powers, particularly in Wales. And like I say, maybe it's more of a question for us in terms of why that is and why Scotland seems to have done so much better. But if you've got any thoughts on that, I'd be interested.
Well, I mean, I do think you are getting a raw deal, and it is because you've got a Labour government, and there's a real choice for people next May and you do represent change. There's no question about that. Despite Labour's claims that 8 months ago, they haven't really changed very much. No. It's more of the same. So I think you've got a massive opportunity to address these issues. And yes, you're absolutely right. Why isn't the Crown Estate devolved? Why haven't you got police and criminal justice powers? And these are things that are available in other jurisdictions, even in Northern Ireland. So why not? We are getting a bit of a raw deal as well in Scotland because Labour are using funding opportunities to what I describe as playing party politics. And they're using that funding to divert that to areas where they need to strengthen their support. They've done that two ways very recently in relation to 147 million that they're investing in local authority areas in Scotland without any reference whatsoever to the Scottish Government. No consultation, no discussion. They just decided that's where we're putting the money. Same with the Fishing and Coastal Growth Fund, which again is should be available in Wales. They decided to keep the vast bulk of that for England and give us a Barnett consequential share, despite the fact that the biggest segment of the fishing industry, almost 50%, is in Scotland. Mm. So it's Labour playing politics, really decisions that should be developed.
That sounds really familiar.
It does. I mean, and if you looked at the coastline as well, I think you could quite quickly establish that Wales has more than 5% of the Welsh coast of the UK coastline, doesn't it? And certainly Scotland does. And as you say, up in Peterhead, you've got a huge fishing industry, haven't you? And Aberdeen.
Well, tell me a little bit about Wrecsam, Marc.
Yeah. What do you want to know?
We were speaking earlier about the success of the football weekend in the league, Jim. So are spirits high in the town?
Yes, I think it's really interesting how a sports team, a football team, can transform attitudes, but also I think a lot of it is about that recognition, that brand recognition, that global recognition that the new owners and certainly the Disney documentary has given Wrexham. You've now got tourism happening in Wrexham in a way which you'd have laughed at 10 years ago, but is actually quite a significant impact now, I think. And it's just brought a certain buzz to the town. I don't think it's transformative. I don't think we should get overexcited about it, because it's 25 matches a year. You know, it's not the basis for an economic transformation, but people want to come to Wrexham for whatever reason, and I think it's also instilled that sense of, do you know what, we can achieve anything. You know, we were right down in the dumps. We are on the verge of potentially going for promotion to the richest league on the planet. We beat a Premier League team on Friday. You know, what's the limit to our ambitions? We don't have any. And I think, you know, if you can transform that into a political vision, I think that's really, really critical. And there's been that sense, isn't there, in terms of Scotland and in Wales, oh, you could never survive, you could never make it. Well, you know, it's this small town club which used to be owned by the fans, which was saved by the fans. It was an absolute grassroots achievement just to keep us going. We as fans, I was one of the 4,000 fans that voted to give our club in trust, I think, to these two Americans. I think, you know, there were lots of misgivings, but I think on balance, it's been a good choice. You can't fault them. And we've been part of that journey, and they've recognised that, and I think that's been really important. So it's not your average football fairy tale. I think it's absolutely unique, you know, but it has a wider political dimension.
Yeah, you're striking chords with me as well, because obviously with Scotland qualifying for the World Cup.
Yeah, you lucky people.
So, you know, there's a tremendous mood of optimism in the country. And you're right, extend into politics, just and confident. As an outsider, to some extent, I'm a new Scot, as it were. I detect sometimes a wee bit of a lack of confidence in people in the stand up and take their place among the other nations of the world. And because there is now this great air of confidence, we've seen the First Minister now calling for a public holiday the Monday after Scotland play their first game. To be honest with you, there might not be too many people at work that Monday anyway.
Unofficial bank holidays are the best, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really good for the country. It's really good for morale. And, you know, football is a very important part of the Scottish economy.
Yeah.
You know, just the people who go to the matches, the money they spend in association with the football club that they support. It's to do with all the transport, the people who go to local hospitality. And, of course, Scotland believes that we give football to the world, if we do believe.
Well,
there you go.
Yeah, I'm not going to get into an argument with you, but Wrexham is the third oldest club in the world. but I think I was at the European Championships in 2016, and I think that's obviously we hadn't qualified since 1958 for a major championship. That was a game changer in more ways than one in terms of that Welsh national identity and that confidence you talked about, and people really felt, you know what, we're a nation that can stand alongside anyone. We weren't just there to make up the numbers. We got to the semi-finals? I forget now. But the whole point being, we were there on merit, and we could stand alongside anyone. And I think that if you look at where the kind of pro-independence growth has been in Wales, I don't think it's just down to that, but that confidence element stems from that football success. I think, it's a decent argument.
John Charles was that?
That was 58. Yeah, that was a great team.
Well, you remember.
I don't remember. She always does this to me. Yeah, I'm not old.
I wasn't even born.
No.
I suppose that leads on quite nicely then in terms of, that conversation about confidence, and there's lots of things that feed into that, but it's particularly relevant, isn't it, in terms of the question of independence for us here in Wales and obviously in Scotland as well. What's the latest in terms of polling, in terms of independence, the way forward now for the SNP in terms of that second referendum?
Well, I think the majority of polls are showing a small majority for independence, 52%. The occasional poll goes as high as 60%. But, a lot of that is to do with people desperately looking for something, a different way, a different approach. And our slogan at the moment is a fresh start with independence. And that's what we're plugging, a fresh start. And it's very important because some of our polling experts are telling us that there are an awful lot of people who not only think that they're unlikely to see an improvement in their living standards during the Parliament, but actually feel that there's a strong possibility they won't see an improvement in their living standards in their lifetimes. That's the kind of view that's driving potential support for these more extreme parties. But it's something that I think we also need to harness in the independence movement by saying to people, look, there's a different way here. You don't have to be a slave to the Westminster Exchequer, the Treasury. You can keep your own income and use it for your own good. And that's something that we're very confident about because we have a very strong economy in Scotland in terms of energy, in terms of our food and drink industry, in terms of tourism, already, Marc, farming, and also, the more modern industries like gaming, for example, and the space agency business in Glasgow, and with now hopefully a space base in the far north. So we just need to communicate to people that it doesn't be like this. There's a different way, and build on the base that we've already achieved. And bear in mind, Carrie and Marc, when we started out on this journey before the first referendum, support for independence was around 25%. And when it closed the day of the poll, we were up to 45%. And anybody who thought that a 55-45 split in a referendum like that would last for a lifetime, really and truthfully, they don't know very much about politics, because the momentum is with the independence movement, and I'm certain that we will achieve our goal in the foreseeable future. And that will have implications and ramifications for Northern Ireland and for Wales.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's interesting as well listening to those figures, because support for independence in Wales now is sitting at around about 35%. But it wasn't so long ago. You're only going back to 2014, funnily enough, when there was polling then putting support at 12%. So, even in Wales, the conversation is absolutely mainstream now, and that prospect of independence is a normal discussion, especially for younger people. And the trajectory we see in polling shows, majority support for independence with under 24s. So the future's bright, isn't it? And I think, like you say, the idea of being able to offer people that positive alternative, and hopefully to get people to understand that the only way really we improve our quality of life here in Wales and in Scotland, the same principle, is when the country next door isn't making so many of the key decisions. We've got to make decisions in our own interest. That's the starting point, isn't it? I think it's just...
You mentioned the railways, and in Scotland we've nationalised the railways. So we've fewer industrial disputes, we have better paid staff, we have a higher level of satisfaction, and we have cheaper fares. So those are possible if you were to gain control of the wheels. In the health service, our waiting lists are falling. They're actually growing in England. Why? Because they've had industrial disputes. Our junior doctors have called off their strike in Scotland, and our waiting lists are going down. So there is a better way, there is a different way, and I think it's applied SNP.
So your trains work, and your waiting lists are going down. I mean, it's a really interesting one in terms of health, because in Wales, waiting lists have been skyrocketing. Labour have completely failed to manage that. They've completely missed targets to bring those waiting lists down. So it's one of the key things we're talking to people about on the doorstep, is putting a plan of action in place to bring those waiting lists down. And obviously the SNP and the Scottish Government is a clear example to point to for people, in terms of these things can be done, these problems can be solved. And equally with things like poverty, I know Fflint Wrecsam went to visit Scotland back in October to discuss the SNP child payment, because we're looking, hopefully under a Plaid Cymru government, to implement a similar scheme here. Because if we don't do something, Wales would have the highest child poverty rates of anywhere in the UK by 2029. That's what's projected. So something's got to change, for us. And it's great just to hear those examples that you gave there, practical examples of how, that different approach, that different trajectory is already underway in Scotland. It's quite hopeful to listen to.
Yeah. So another couple of things I'd be interested to hear in Wales in relation to these things. Water, we've got quite a spat with Steve Reid, who's the former DEFRA secretary. He's now moved on to other things. But he claimed and doubled down on his claim that the quality of water in Scotland was worse than it is in England. And it's people know when they turn on their tap whether their water's clean or not. And we know that cleaners will get issues, but it's much better. So I'm not sure what the situation is in Wales. On the issue of child poverty, Labour said, and they were forced to U-turn on the two-child cap, but they're not in that until next April. So meanwhile, what about all those thousands of children between now and who are still forced in a situation where they're living in poverty or extreme? What's the situation in Wales with regard to those things?
In terms of water, I think water is one of those symbolic issues in Wales anyway, for various reasons. But we export half our water to England, but ironically we pay more for our water in Wales than England pays in England. We have a ridiculous situation here. The cost of water, the water bills have gone up, I think it's 42% in Wales in the last year, the highest in England and Wales. So we have this ridiculous situation where we have no control over it. Slightly better pollution standards, but that's not saying very much in terms of England is an absolute, I think it's fair to say, a shit show at the moment. And Wales isn't much better because it's not being run for the people. It's meant to be a not for profit, but there are people being paid lots of money within Dŵr Cymru Welsh Water, and we really need to get to grips with that, because people are struggling to pay bills, whether it's energy or water, everything else that's essential to life, and it doesn't get much more essential than water, does it?
No, indeed. I would love to get to another Plaid conference. I mean, as you say, Marc, maybe that will be a celebratory event after May's election, when with a fair wind and all the luck in the world, Plaid will be forming a government, either with partners or on their own, after the next election.